So here's 5 tight ends I'm going to bench heading into week 11. The first guy is Noah Fant of the Denver Broncos, and I've been down on Fant now the last 2 or 3 weeks. And once again, Fant, he might not even play this week as well. He missed practice today with the ankle injury, and he's been banged up most of the year. You could tell by the numbers. You could tell if you're watching the games. He's just not looking right. He's limping a little on and off the field, in and out. And now this week, if he does play versus Miami, it's a tough matchup. And Fant, I just don't see him doing it this week at all versus Miami. Last week versus an easy Raider team, 7 targets, only 3 catches, 18 yards. And it's going to be more of the same for Noah Fant. So he's a guy I'm going to bench this week. The next guy is Jonnu Smith of the Tennessee Titans. And Jonnu Smith, he's been very touchdown dependent now the last few weeks. And he's a guy I said to go out there and trade if you can after these 2 weeks. Because like I said in the last time, and I'm going to say it again, Smith, if he don't get a touchdown in week 9 versus the Bears and in week 10 versus Indy, he's only going to finish with 5 or less fantasy points. And now this week he's got a tough Baltimore team. Baltimore is coming off a bad loss on Sunday Night Football versus Cam Newton and the Patriots. And now this defense, they're at home. They're going to gear up and they're going to try to tee off on Tannehill and that Tennessee offense. And like I said, Smithy's the 4th option there. It goes Henry Brown and Corey Davis in the pecking order. And this week I could see Jonnu Smith really have a bad game with 5 or less fantasy points. So he's the second guy I'm going to bench. The third guy is Robert Tonyan of the Green Bay Packers. I told you to drop him for weeks now. And Tonyan, people are starting to listen a little bit. He's down now to only 49% owned in fantasy leagues. And the numbers just haven't been there for Tonyan. He's had 1 double-digit fantasy day in Week 8 versus Minnesota. Then Week 9, he didn't do nothing versus San Francisco with 1 catch for 5 yards. And then Week 10 versus Jacksonville, only 3 catches for 33 yards in a plus matchup. And now here in Week 11, he versus a tough Indianapolis Colts defense that gives up the 3rd least amount of fantasy points to tight ends. And that spells trouble for Tonyan. Allen Lazard's back, so that's another guy that's going to take more targets from Tonyan. He's a guy I'm just going to drop and stay away from. He was good for a few weeks in the first 3-4 weeks of the season, but now with everyone back for Green Bay, I just don't see the numbers and the production being there for Tonyan. So I would bench him and drop him here in this case. The 4th guy I'm going to bench in is Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. Andrews, he just hasn't gotten it going. Last week, it was nice to see him have a 13-point fantasy day in PPR leagues with 7 catches for 61 yards on 9 targets. But this week versus Tennessee, it's going to be more of the same for Andrews, where he's not going to have a big fantasy day, in my opinion. And he could have anywhere from 6 to 8 points. I know you're probably not going to bench him in most leagues, but the expectations for Andrews, you shouldn't set the bar that high, because if he don't get a touchdown, he's not getting high fantasy points. And he's only scored 20 or more fantasy points twice the whole season. So he's been a disappointment. That Raven offense is out of sync. And Mark Andrews, I'm going to bench him. And the 5th and final guy, I'm benching at tight end this week's Austin Hooper of the Cleveland Browns. We saw him come back last week, and the production wasn't there at all. He had 2 targets and 1 catch for 8 yards. That's not going to get the job done. I know the weather was bad. It was windy, cold, and rainy. But the same thing might happen again this Sunday in Cleveland when Philly comes to town. I know Philly's giving up the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends, but Austin Hooper, I just don't see him having a good game. He's a guy I said steer away from and drop in the tight end drop video. And he's been dropped in 3% of leagues. He's still owned in 64%. But I just don't like Hooper this week. I got rid of him in a few, and I'm going to take my chances with someone else on the Warriors. So that's 5 tight ends I'm benching heading into week 11.